what really interested me about you is that you wrote a book called No Nonsense Spirituality. Why that title?
Yeah, I really wanted to approach spirituality in a way, and this is embedded with my own story of my past with religion and faith deconstruction, but I wanted to have tools for the good life, have tools for the best things in life with as little demands of faith as possible. So a lot of times what happens in spirituality is there's some tool for anxiety or rituals or community or love or awe or transcendence. But a lot of time and we have so much science that says these tools are good for our mental health and our well-being. But a lot of the times those tools are wrapped in some kind of truth claim, some kind of vessel that you have to believe in order to get that tool. And I come from a Mormon and Christian background where there was a lot of kind of faith claims and demands on faith. And it's just not a game that I could play anymore. I'm philosophically minded, I'm a skeptic by nature. And so I was trapped in this place where I needed tools, but I also couldn't believe in the truth claims that we just don't know yet. And so for me, no nonsense spirituality is this process of how do I get the tool and be able to apply that to my life with as little demands of faith about things, about ultimate reality that we just don't know yet, because as humans, we are historically bad at that game.
Mm. The first point that pops up is I want to understand more of your spiritual journey and what was the spark that started this search towards that book?
Yeah, so I was raised Mormon when I was a child and had a pretty normal upbringing. During my teenage years, I started to question. I'm of a questioning nature. By the time I was a teenager, I was really rebelling and bumping up against some of the more absurd aspects of my religion that just didn't make sense, which resulted in me getting kicked out of my home. And so that was a very trying time for me. I was living away from my family my senior year of high school, and I had this thought that if I could just figure out what is true, what is real, what
Mm.
is going on with reality, then I could pattern my life accordingly, and then my life wouldn't suck as much as it sucked as much as it sucked then. So I didn't really know, I didn't really realize how maybe egotistical that thought was at 16, that I was going to seek truth and figure it out. But I thought, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to figure out what's going on here. And what ended up happening is I unlearned my learning process of going to school and theology school, trying to figure out these metaphysical questions about the base level of reality and history of religion and philosophy. All of these things, I was seeking truth, but I ended up really unlearning everything. So I deconstructed my own religion of Mormonism, then I deconstructed Christianity, then I deconstructed God. I lost faith in God, I lost faith in religion. I lost sense of self the sense of self being somewhat of an illusion. I lost the sense that we have free will. I mean, I was just deconstructing, just this bulldozer that just kept knocking every anchor that I had socially and psychologically, until really I came to a place where there was nothing left, that I believed in nothing, that I knew nothing. I literally right now have all of my schooling done in theology except for my dissertation, because I told my professor I don't even know what I would write about anymore. My dissertation would be I unlearned everything, I know nothing, the end. And so at that point, that was a point where I needed help. I needed tools. I was somewhat nihilistic. I was somewhat existentially depressed. These blows were catastrophic to my identity and also my social identity. And so that kind of started the process of I've been in this realm of spirituality and religion and studying this for so long. There's good things here. How can I get those things even now as a skeptic, even now knowing what I know about God and religion after all my studies and unlearning things? How can I be able to get spiritual tools? Because I've spent time with mystics, I've had mystical experiences like you've had when we were talking off air. How can I get a sense of those things? Because I'm in need of help. I'm suffering here, but how can I do it without having to play the truth claim game? Because I'd been doing that for so long, I couldn't play that game anymore.
So You brought about the next question, which is pretty much what was your mystical experience, if you're open to share.
Sure. So I've had many. Some people will accuse me as an atheist of never having a spiritual experience, and I'm a deeply spiritual person, and spirituality is now actually my full-time job as an atheist spiritual director. So curating moments of spirituality and awe and studying with mystics is a huge cornerstone of my life. So these moments, I have some peak experiences that are more rare, but moments of genuine awe tend to be daily and weekly for me. Um, I, I would say at the beginning, and this is usually true for most people when you are first kind of getting your feet into the world of spirituality. You may have a peak experience looking at the stars or having a really profound meditation that changes your actual being and even brain chemistry. And I've had some of these peak experiences. I've also dabbled in psychedelics and done some guiding with psychedelics that can lend towards those experiences. But something that shifted for me more lately is not having to chase these peak experiences and go to the
Mm.
next retreat and go to the next drug combination, and you got to go to Costa Rica and try this, and you got to go to this shaman, you got to do this breathing
The
exercise, and you got
ayahuasca.
to do the ice bath, and you got to do this. And sometimes the masculine side of spirituality can kind of become this chasing of spiritual actions and chasing of peak experiences. And for me now, especially as a woman, especially as a mother with children, I don't have a lot of time in my day to go on retreat and chase the next peak experience. And so for me, spirituality now is much more about how can I wake up in every moment, in ordinary moments? How can I be as awake as you can be, in meditation on retreat? How can you access that state while you're doing the dishes? How can you access that state when you're arguing with your partner? How can you access that state when you're just going on a walk with your dog? And so for me now, those mystical experiences that you talk about, you may need a few at the beginning to just show you that there's a different way to
Mm.
be, especially for skeptical people. Sometimes maybe psychedelics can help open that door. But after that, you don't need to chase those. You can actually access. That just opens the door that you can access that level of awakeness at any time. And so now, if you were to look at my life now, it's not that I'm having these amazing Kundalini awakening. I'm leaving my body. I'm on my mat for hours. My life doesn't look like that. I'm awake when my most regular meditation is the breath that I take before my children get off the bus so that I can be present when they tell me about their day. That's my most regular meditation.
You define your perspective a lot as a spiritual atheist, and these two words are really interesting and contradictory. And I know that a lot of truths in this universe are contradictions. So, could you define this term, and what does it mean to be a spiritual atheist?
Sure. So spirituality for me means connection. So connection to deepest self and connection to outside of self. For many people, that connection to something outside of themselves includes a supernatural element, includes a deity,
Mm.
especially in the West, includes one of the in the Abrahamic religions, a theistic God that's really kind of in control of things. And so for me as a spiritual atheist, it's all I'm saying is I have studied this God. It's not that I haven't thought about it or I haven't studied the Bible or I haven't studied the Quran. I literally have a master's degree in theology from a Christian seminary, and I've had a Sufi mystic teacher, Sufi being the mystical branch of Islam, for the past 20 years. And so I've really looked at this theistic God. I've
Yeah.
really thought about it, and I'm not convinced. It's too problematic. And there was a point in my theology degree where I just had this thought where it just really felt like we were the ones creating gods rather than God creating us. And you can see why different cultures create gods to be certain ways and why God changes over time based on the needs of the culture and the needs of the people. And so to me, spiritual atheism just says I'm skeptical that we can know about that not only you can know that there's a God, which is, deism, but you can believe that you can know the mind and will of God. And when I look back at human history and the claims that we've made to know the mind and will of God and the nature of God, we are just historically so bad at this game. And I just don't have any faith that we're interacting with ultimate reality or the creator of the universe in that way. So I'm skeptical to the theistic claims around Abrahamic religions, but I'm incredibly open to the joy and the depth and the meaning that comes from exploring the universe within and exploring the
Mm.
universe kind of outside you and really being connected. Anything in nature that isn't connected dies. And I think that's true of us too. If you're disconnected to yourself and you're just numbing, you're asleep and just constantly numbing, that to me is a lack of spirituality. You're lacking a connection to outside of yourself and to yourself. So for me, spirituality is how can we explore that and get you the best tools for your life and your beliefs with as little you have to believe this in order to get those
Mm.
tools as possible. I don't want to jump through those faith hoops anymore. I don't think we need to get these spiritual tools.
That directly gives me goosebumps because it reminds me of my youth. I was a born Christian, and force they forced me to believe certain things, right? God
Mm-hmm.
is this, God is that, God is judging, God is loving if you do this, and all these conditions to God, which I think are the hoops you're talking about. Um, and as a rebel myself, also and a skeptic, I it made me pull away from religion for a very long time.
Hmm.
But from the spirituality standpoint and being open, I've been able to have these mystical encounters with the divine within. And from that experience, I realized that there is something bigger than us. So, from your standpoint, how does that relate?
Hmm. Yeah, two things kind of come up for me there. First of all, I think you did a good job in separating really the difference between religion and mysticism. So since we're using these words, I think we should dig in there for a second. So really what mysticism is at its root is the experience of what people have called God. And it doesn't matter what you call it. So I've spent a lot of time with mystics. I've danced with Sufi mystics. I've studied Jesus's parables with Christian mystics. I've hung out with mushroom mystics. I've hung out with atheist mystics. And there's this quote that said, religions may quarrel, but mystics all speak the same language. And it's true. Nobody cares what you call what people are calling God or whatever people are calling your transcendent experience. Those are just mouth sounds to try and
Mm-hmm.
describe an inner experience. And so when people are talking about experience, like if you and I were to be traveling in Italy and we go into a cathedral and we're just filled with this awe, and someone says, I feel God here. As an atheist, I have no problem with that phrase. I have no problem even saying that. I feel God here too. Because what they're talking about is a subjective experience that I'm feeling something here. And maybe, for a lot of human history, we've called that God. But it doesn't matter what we call it. We could, if we want to use secular terms, we could call it a state of transcendence. We could call it states of consciousness. There's lots of things that we can call it. They're just mouth sounds. What matters is the
Mm.
experience. And that's the root of mysticism. And every religion has this branch of mysticism that, hey, you guys are getting really caught up with the rules and trying to define this, but are you actually experiencing this? That's what mystics care about. Now, what religions will do is they'll take a mystical experience and they'll start to put a clubhouse around it. This is God. These are the attributes of God. This is what God wants. God told us that we need to kill this people over here. God told the men we need to take more wives. That usually happens at some point. Um, and then we start to make claims about reality. So while I am happy as an atheist to say I feel God here, that's fine. I don't. If somebody says, especially in America over here, God says that if you're gay, then you're going to hell. Okay, that's different. That's not just a feeling or an experience. Now you're talking about a claim that you not only know which God is real, but also that you claim an interpretation of the mind and will of this God and claims of holy text. Now that is different. Now you're making not just a subjective experience claim, you're making a claim about objective reality.
Mm.
And so I separate those two things. Are we talking about subjective experience, which tends to be that mysticism side, or are you making a claim about objective reality? So for me in my spirituality now, I spend a lot of time with the subjective experience side, both me personally and helping others to find that place. And I spend very little time making any kind of claims about ultimate reality. As an atheist, it's not saying that I know that there is no God. It really is I'm not convinced of this God, and I've spent some time studying it. And I'm not even convinced that we're smart enough to even be dealing with this question, because when you look at human history, we've always been wrong when it comes to gods and what they want. So atheism to me is really about that intellectual humility to say there seems to be better and worse ways to live. There seems to be this beauty and mysticism that has been housed in religion that's worth studying. But can we do this without superstition? Can we do this without cognitive biases? Can we do this without making a clubhouse around it and making truth claims that we just don't know yet? And that to me has been the spiritual path that has paid off the most for me.
Mm. It relates so much, and it's such a smart way, the way you put the subjective on one side and the objective on the other. Um, there's a point that comes to mind. For example, in the Bible, what was it that didn't convince you?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I would say watching how God changes and seeing what is going on in the culture at the time to create those changes. That was incredibly eye-opening for me, because when you're a kid, especially when you grow up in America, you get this sense that the Bible is the word of God. It's like this one message, right? It's this one cohesive message from God, and you just read it and you can figure out your life. That's kind of the attitude around it. And then you get into it and it's this journey. This God goes through this journey from polytheism to monotheism. This God goes through this journey of being really just a storm god, but then just being elevated because storm gods become very important when you talk about agriculture. Or you talk about the progression of hell and how Jewish hell is very different from Christian hell. And so all of these doctrines are changing all of the time. There's not one doctrine in the Bible that stays the same and stays consistent. There's not one aspect to the nature of God that stays the same and stays consistent. And so when you watch the God change, it's mirroring the changes that are going on in that society at the time and the needs of the people at that time, both psychologically and socially and economically and geographically. All of these things are elements into why you would need a particular God at a particular time, or why you would need God to say this or that. And so once I really dug into the Bible and saw how much that this is just a human conversation, and you can see all of the cultural elements as part of this human conversation, you can still learn a lot. I still love Jesus. I still study the parables. I still think you need to read the Bible to understand Western civilization. I still think it's a worthy journey to go on, but not because this is a coherent message about the God of the universe and the correct religion. The Bible itself is really just a mess. It's a messy conversation. And to me, that just really showed that this is humans creating gods rather than gods creating humans.
Yeah, I've had a lot of friends recommend the Bible, and they say to me, start there. And I get confused. So they say to me, start in Mark. And I start in Mark. I start in Matthew. And it's a confusing journey. And honestly, it doesn't relate to me yet. It doesn't resonate.
Hmm.
There's some parables that do, like, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall know God. I know this to be
Hmm.
true because I've experienced it. I've touched the purity of the heart, and I've felt what we call the higher consciousness or God. But when I read, there's a lot of description, but still there's kind of that feeling. Like, I came to this debate with a friend, And he was like, yeah, you've got this one life, it's a test, and if you fail, you go to hell.
Mm.
And I thought about it and I told him, if you have an all loving father and you make a mistake once, will he just throw you in hell and now give you a chance to reprimand, to correct your wrongs? There's a lot of these questions that pop to mind. What are some that pop in your mind when you have these conversations with Christians?
Yeah, it's to me, and I've heard that, just skip the Old Testament and skip Leviticus especially, and start with Mark. But the interesting thing is when you do biblical scholarship, the first half of Mark is our earliest account, about Mark through 1 through 14 or 15. And the first part of Mark really doesn't have a lot of supernatural elements. There's no mention of the resurrection. And so what really blew my mind is, we have people that say that there's these claims. Hey, all these people were around Jesus and they saw Jesus die and they saw Jesus rise from the dead. And then you dig into the scholarship and it's like, no, our earliest texts really show that Jesus was a radical, homeless mystic. And there were no supernatural elements to his story. There's no even mention of resurrection or virgin births or things like that. And these claims about the supernatural elements of Jesus' story come far after he died, 60, 80, sometimes 100 years later, from people who weren't there. And so it seems absurd to me in a world where there are so many truth claims that you're going to stake your life on a story told by a campfire for 80 years. And we all know stories become legends, especially in societies where these are storytellers. There's no sense that there's fiction and nonfiction, and there's history and there's not history. Those distinctions haven't even been made yet. And so you're going to stake your life on a story that spread from campfire to campfire, was translated, retranslated. Scribes are adding things in. We can tell when they're adding things in. It's retranslated again. And you're going to stake your life on that over all other religions. Some religions, the people who say, oh, there's eyewitnesses, there's more eyewitnesses to Joseph Smith being a prophet in Mormonism than there is for Christianity, but they're not Mormon. So none of these things are rational. There's not a single person I've ever met who says, I've studied all of the religions equally. I've studied, all of their truth claims and how believable and the, is this a first-hand eyewitness or a second? I've really studied it, and I think this religion is the correct one. We're not that logical. We're not that rational. We're emotional creatures at base, and we add logic second. And so what I think is happening is we benefit from these religions psychologically and socially first. Usually the religion that you grew up in, but not always. But usually with these religions, you are getting some kind of psychological benefit and usually also a social benefit. And so once you have that, your brain wants to hold on to that. And so it'll find rationality. It'll find, oh, there's eyewitnesses. But that's not what's driving you to this particular religion. It's usually the tools that religion provides. And so if we can get those tools without the truth claims, then we don't have to play this game anymore. So for someone like you who has had mystical experiences, I wouldn't recommend Mark and Matthew and Luke. I would recommend the apocryphal texts. The most mystical text we have of Jesus is the Gospel of Thomas. It's very short, very paradoxical. It's very it's so paradoxical. They're almost like Zen koans where they kind of take you back for a second. You have to work with it. But I tend towards some of the more mystical texts surrounding Jesus that maybe it was never about rising from the dead and sin and all these things that we added later. Maybe this was like a Buddha character. Maybe this was literally just a homeless mystic radical who was teaching a different way to love, a more transcendent kind of love. And when you look at Jesus from that lens, there's still a lot you can learn from Jesus while also not getting sucked into something like American Christian nationalism, which is the very opposite that a mystic like Jesus would have supported.
That's the thing, is getting sucked into the dogma, which I feel actually takes away people away from Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And once I had this deep meditation one day, and it was Holy Friday. And my mom says, "Come to church with us." So I said, "Okay, I'm gonna go to church." And so I get there, and there's a thousand people in the house, and the preacher was saying things in Arabic, and I couldn't understand Arabic. So I was just listening, and at that moment, I felt in my heart the presence of Jesus. It's
Hmm.
very hard to explain because it wasn't something that I was seeking, but I was open to it, and um, I started tearing up uncontrollably. And my mother looks at me and she's like, "Why are you sad?" And I was like, "These are tears of joy, of healing, of love." And it's the first time that I intimately encountered what people would call Jesus, but it wasn't with a box or an identification or labeling him. It was just with an open heart. And that's where I knew there's a lot of truth there, but I don't want to get sucked into the dogma. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've heard that be called Christ consciousness. That experience that you're describing. And I, even as an atheist, you know, when there's some forms of atheism that are very militant and just think that this whole thing is just woo and just throw Jesus away. And I have no interest in doing that. Something like Christ consciousness, or working with these parables that really speak to simplicity, and they speak to love, and they speak to humility, and they speak to how we should treat other people. In the Gospel of Thomas, the disciples are asking, this new approach with religion that you're doing, what are the rules? Like, when do we fast and what do we eat? So the disciples are asking Jesus, like, what are the rules here? And Jesus responds, let's start with telling the truth. Just tell the truth.
Mm.
That's the rule. Tell the truth. And there are these little koans like that happen in the Gospel of Thomas that show a different side to Jesus, because they're less building on kind of these truth claims and these supernatural things happening. And that side of Jesus is still very profound to me and still has a lot to teach me. And there's something there. And you can call it Christ consciousness if you're a Christian mystic or come from a Christian tradition. That doesn't bother me at all. The Buddhists have their own terms for that space. The mushroom people have their own terms for that space. The secular people, the Sam Harris types, have more neuroscience words for some of these states of consciousness. I don't care what you call it. All I know is it's really good for you. It makes life a hell of a lot, more worth living, and you're a lot happier. I mean, we have the science that shows that these experiences and this way of life is the best antidote that we have to things like existential depression. It's Lisa Miller. She's a professor at Columbia University who's really done the most studies for the science of spirituality. And her studies have shown that if you could put spirituality, this kind of Jesus way of living, if you could put it into a pill and give it to people, it actually is our strongest pill for things like suicidality and risky behaviors, and addiction and depression. And so spirituality is good for you, but like you say, we have to be very aware of getting sucked into the dogmatic side of it.
Yeah, that's the main thing is that there's so many people now that have lost their spirituality and that are living life in a state of ego, what we could call the ego. And and I've been there and I know how much suffering there is when you only think I'm this little ego, this self-image that I have of myself, and I'm getting controlled the entire day by this, and I have no free will to experience the oneness within. So what do you think about that and what do you make of it?
Yeah, I think there's a reason that Nietzsche, when he was talking about the death of God and that the decline of organized religion, he spoke about it a lot. And he really predicted that there's going to be this advent of nihilism that comes. So he predicted that when God dies and people leave religion, First, there's going to be political religions, which in the 20th century we certainly saw. And there's going to be miserable people, and that society may not survive nihilism. And what we're seeing is what he predicted, that yes, we may be leaving organized religion in the West in increasing numbers, but we're creating new religions, we're creating political religions, and we're also substituting religion with pleasure and with numbing. And then we're all miserable, and then we all have to be on antidepressants because there's a meaning crisis. And it's Viktor Frankl who said that if you don't have meaning, you're going to seek pleasure. And then when you seek, if all your life is just this dopamine wheel of seeking pleasure, it's the Buddhists who say that, the fastest way to become unhappy is just to get on this wheel of trying to become happy and get the next dopamine hit. And so I do see that happening at large. And I'm also reminded of Leo Tolstoy, he was 50 years old when he had an existential crisis and realized that life was meaningless and he was going to die and that his ego was running everything. He was already married. He already had children. He was already an established author. He was already very wealthy. He was living this lavish life. He has this complete existential crisis. He's suicidal for 4 years. He can't have any rope in the house. He can't have any knives in the house. He has his servants take away everything in the house that he could kill himself with. And then what does he discover that gets him out of this kind of ego way of living that you're talking about, that was making him miserable? It just wasn't worth living for, was to find a deeper way of spirituality. He discovered Jesus's parables. He becomes vegetarian. He starts gardening with local peasants and becoming a part of the community. He starts writing in a different way, writings that hopefully help humanity after he's gone. He lives a life of simplicity. He starts giving money away, and he just completely changes his life into a life like a Jesus or a Buddha, where it was about morality and it was about character development and it was about love and it was about community and it was about the people around him. And it saved him from this very dark nihilistic place. And the the path that he took is now called Tolstoyanism, and it's a whole way of life that you can adopt. But the point isn't that we should all become Tolstoyists or whatever the word is. The point is you should make your own ism, your own kind of life that's worth living, that is not as ego driven and driven by these kind of just seeking dopamine or seeking pleasure, that there's a deeper way to live that is far more satisfying. The problem is, in this religious conversation, we're just talking about whose God is right, and we're just fighting about whose God is right, especially when when we're looking
Mm.
at the Middle East and things like that, and we're completely missing the point of what religion is for. Religion, all religions, including Islam, including Christianity, have this depth of mysticism that is trying to point you to this place where you're going to suffer less. And that's the heart of religion that I think is worth holding on to, even though I'm a secularist, I'm a skeptic, I'm an atheist, I'm all those things. That part of religion is worth holding on to because you suffer a lot less.
So what you're saying is basically, instead of going with one team against the other, to just go to the end goal of every team.
Yes. The mystical root of every team, which is the same place, different language, different mouth sounds, different stories, different analogies. This is what all mystics do. They start with that place, and then everybody's religious stories are just stories. This is Adam and Eve. They're not real people, but what can we learn by this story? Because there's a reason that biblical stories lasted for 2,000 years. They're interesting. They're psychological. They're compelling. They're surprising. They're teaching us something about ourselves. So yeah, if we can read the Bible and the Quran, not to try to figure out which God is right, because then we just get lost in these theological debates that go nowhere. Instead, if we look at what is this pointing to, which is what Buddha says, right? Buddha says these are all these religions, these are all fingers pointing at the moon. If we can get to the moon, then you actually can travel in all of these religions. And I spend time in New Age spirituality. I spend time in any religion that I can get my hands on. If I travel, I'm always going to whatever their sacred holy place is. I want to go there. And it doesn't matter the words that they use or the analogies or stories that they use, their fingers pointing you somewhere to a similar place, a place where we're living from our beingness, where we have spiritual tools, where we're driven by love and compassion, and we're connected and we're aware of ourselves. We have tools for our lives, and we have awe, and we have community, and we have ritual, we have states of transcendence. It's all pointing us to the same place.
You've mentioned quite a bit about tools of awe and transcendence. For me, meditation has been a huge thing in my life and has helped me to quiet down the monkey mind and to have more states of oneness and of the being, which you talk about. So, what are some tools that have helped you?
Yeah. So certainly meditation can be helpful to go to that place. Psychedelics can be helpful to go to that place, but uh for me it tends to be language. So there are many pathways to this place of awe and transcendence. A lot of times it's something big, things like the Grand Canyon or a starry night or a cathedral, or uh, big things tend to incur this feeling with us. But also, it can be music. It can be watching the kindness in other people and service. It can be your body itself. Some people just really paying attention to their embodied experience is their pathway. These are body type people. For me, it tends to be words and conversation that I could read something that can take me there, and then I can hang on to those words or maybe put a quote on the wall, and it can kind of cue me to go back to that place. So I tend to be more of a words and language person. But
Mm.
something that really helped me, and if you're listening, you can check this out. There's something called the Tree of Contemplative Practices, where they did this study to try to figure out how are humans experiencing awe, or transcendence, or these kind of states of contemplation. And then they kind of organized it into these 7 branches on a tree, and some of it is tends to be the more meditative things, but there's also creativity, there's also political activism, there's also body people. These are the people that don't run outside because they're trying to lose weight and they hate their body. It's actually really a meditative experience for them. It's what connects them. Nature people, so like the people who do similar rituals for summer and fall and winter, and they kind of have more of a cyclical path. But it outlines that there are many different paths to this place, and there's no one right way to get there, but there are going to be ways that you resonate with more than others. So my job now as a spiritual director isn't to say, here's what I did, follow me, here's the 12 steps to your spiritual life, blah, blah, blah. You could probably make a lot of money doing that. The point is, hey, here are some options, here are some pathways where
Mm.
people have this experience. You're an adult. Hopefully, you've had enough experiences that you can maybe say, I think I resonate with this path more than this one. I think this one over here is calling me. And then I kind of hold your hand and we take some steps in that direction. And that's what an ethical kind of spiritual director will do for you. They won't say, follow me. They'll say, here's some paths based on kind of what you're needing. And I'll explore them together with you. And I'll never lead the way because that's unethical, because my path isn't going to be your path.
Mm. I love the fact that you tailor the process to the specific person's natural tendency.
Hmm.
There's one thing that popped to mind. You talked a lot about psychedelics, and I want to ask you, what have you realized from a psychedelic trip that you weren't aware of before about that consciousness within?
Hmm. Yeah. So psychedelics are really a way to break into your subconscious and really explore that space without your ego. And
Mm.
so it tends to be, and there's a warning here. You have to pay attention to the legality in your area. You also want to find a guide who you trust. because it's a very vulnerable place to be. It was about 4 years from the time that I decided that I wanted to try this to where I found a guide that I trusted, and, a situation that I felt safe in.
Mm.
So, with that caveat, I will say it can help people understand that there's a different way to be, because a lot of people who try meditation, especially if you're more skeptical, you'll sit down, you'll just be thinking your thoughts, and then 10 minutes later, you'll stand up and you'll check on a box that you meditated, and you hope that it decreased your stress and that you go to sleep better that night. And it's just more or less like just quiet time with your thoughts, and nothing really else happens. And if you sit on that mat for 10 years, you'll go to some places. Like, things will happen over a
Yeah.
10-20 year meditation journey. But the first few times, nothing may happen other than you just being neurotic on a mat and being really uncomfortable because you're just sitting in your neuroticism. And so what psychedelics can do is rather than slowly get through there through years of meditation, psychedelics can kind of take you on a rocket ship and say, "Hey, there's actually another place to stand. There's another way to be in the world. Let's turn your ego off. The part of you that
Mm.
cares about how you look and what you're doing, and I'm a Britney and I have these preferences and I do these things. Let's turn that part of you off and see what else there is." And I've seen many different experiences as a guide, on these drugs. For some people, they go straight to that love of God place, just pure abiding love to all creatures, and they'll just sit in that place for an hour. For some people, it tends to be more dark. Maybe they are working through their fears that have been bubbling in their subconscious, but they haven't kind of spent any conscious attention on. Maybe it's their fear of death. For me, it was fear of meaninglessness, fear of boredom, fear of lots of things. Um, for some people, it tends to be very visual, and you can learn things kind of through the mythology and story that's happening in your own mind, like a dream, kind of like active dream work. And some people tend to be more symbolic and go to that space. For some people, it you feel like you did when you were a child before you developed an ego, where you go outside to play for no other reason than just to play. Like, you're looking at flowers and tasting food as if for the first time, because everything is magical again, because this ego brain is turned off and you get to just experience being. So there's lots of places that people go. You never know where you're going to go, but it at least shows you in a way that sometimes meditation doesn't at the beginning, that, hey, if you can, there's another place to stand other than just this ego brain that's just trying to make you look good and just being driven by that all of the time. That you can actually just settle into experience itself, and that tends to be really positive for our mental health. If we can move from being driven by just making money, make sure I look good, make sure I look right, make sure whatever, make sure there's the right acronyms after my name. If we can move away to that, into what is it actually like to just be in a body right now? We're flying through space. We're in these bodies. What is it like to actually taste food? What is it like to actually feel the sun on your skin? What is it like to play like we did when we were kids, where we didn't care how we looked when we danced and we just did
Mm.
cartwheels? And you can actually go back to that place and you can live in that place. But we have to, we have to sometimes unlearn that neurotic, ego driven way of living that served us at usually, it served us at some point in time. We actually need an ego to be able to let go of it, but it's usually no longer serving us when we're later into adulthood, and we want more than just to go to work and then go home and watch Netflix and then do it again the next day. Like, we just need more than that.
That's the thing. There's such a big meaning crisis, and so many people are escaping and numbing themselves, like you said, and it's so true. Because I see it all around me with old friends, and I see that 5 years ago I took the decision that I don't want to live that way, and I want to have fulfillment in my heart. I want to have happiness, genuine happiness, not the kind where it's like a empty bag that always needs to be. And I realized a big part of that was the spiritual journey. And what I'm now, what I really want to ask you is, that's the thing. People get lured into certain religions, trying to find that place of fulfillment within. But I think kids have the answers that adults maybe are not aware of.
Hmm.
And there's a quote from the Bible that directly pops to mind, is that blessed are children for, I think it goes something like that, like blessed are children because they shall know also God
Hmm.
and the purity the child has. So it's amazing.
Yeah. And we see this in all religions. There'll be some aspect of returning, especially in the mystic branches, of returning to how you were as a child, which is really the antidote to the kind of suffering that you're talking about, where you're just numbing out, um, because you've just totally lost how it is to actually just be experiencing in your body, because you're driven by your ego, and that probably served you when you were trying to get a job and trying to establish yourself, but it's no longer really doing anything
Mm,
for you. And so in Buddhism we call it beginner's mind, and Jesus
mm,
will talk about becoming like a little child, submissive, meek, humble, patient, full of love. And it really, and there's other religions that point to this childlike state. And for me, what it was really profound for me, because I was a truth seeker. I'm looking for the truth. I was looking for the true religion. I was looking for the true correct concept of God, and realizing that all we're doing is creating sandcastles that are going to be forgotten, and all these gods and religions will eventually be forgotten, and maybe the universe doesn't care. And then I'm having an existential crisis, because what am I if I'm a truth seeker and there's no truth? And then I'm stuck.
mm,
And so what happened, what you're talking to, this childlike way of being, is there was a time when I was a child where you build sandcastles not because they're going to stay there, or not because there's meaning, or not because you're checking it off of a to-do list. You literally built sandcastles for the experience of building sandcastles. The experience itself was valuable enough. It didn't matter that the wave was going to come and knock it down. We were just so in our bodies and in our embodied experience and in curiosity, and hadn't developed this ego yet, that we could just play and really just
mm,
experience. And Alan Watts talks about this a lot, about going back. He has this famous quote that says that, mystics are the ones who realize that all work is really play. This is all play. We're flying through space right now. These acronyms and these words and these clothes we have to wear, this is all absurd. Like, if you need to learn how to play in this game, or else you're going to go mad. And for me, that was a thought that really saved me, because when I was seeking truth and found no truth, I got really existentially depressed. But if I asked myself, okay, if this is all sandcastles, what are the kinds of sandcastles that I just enjoy building for the experience? And then I got a little bit more out of my head and my neuroticism and back into my body. What do I enjoy doing just for the pure experience of it? And I enjoy, my children, and I enjoy watching the Olympics, and I enjoyed Game of Thrones last night, and I enjoy conversation, and I enjoy reading, and I enjoy learning new terms, and then I got back to reading books, not because I was figuring out truth, but because this is my favorite game. The game that you and I
mm.
are playing right now, where we're saying, hey, this is my reality over here, this is your reality, and we're trying to see, like, hey, what's going on with your reality over there. This
Yeah.
game that we're playing right now is not because I have any, it's not because I'm trying to make money, or I'm going to save the world, or I want to look cool. This is my favorite game, and this is a game that you enjoy playing too, and we're playing together right now. It's like our inner child is playing with these words and concepts, because we enjoy the game of trying to make sense of life, or trying to make sense of all this. And so once I shifted into life at the level of experience, that's when my life really changed. That's when I got out of nihilism. That's when I got out of my depression. And I built my life around what are the things that I want to experience at the level of experience. And my life simplified. I like these people. I like my family. I like, conversations and podcasts like this. I like reading. I like writing. I like my shows. And my life is built around those things.
That's so beautiful. The way you put that, the sand, building your sandcastle and choosing. the sandcastle that you want to build just for the pure sake of the experience, I think there's no better way to end than at that. To leave people with that thought. And yeah. Britt, thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure.
I want to ask, just for people that want to know you more or that want to purchase your book, how could they go about doing that?
Sure. So online, I go by the handle No Nonsense Spirituality. I'm on TikTok and Instagram. I hope to be moving over to YouTube in the fall because I some of these concepts take longer
Need
than,
time.
they need time to flesh out. So I'm trying to get off TikTok and maybe heading over to YouTube. I do have a book called No Nonsense Spirituality, All the Tools, No Faith Required, and it outlines 10 different aspects of spirituality and options and the science behind it and how you can access those without having to believe in really anything. And so if this was interesting to you, you can check out my book on Amazon, No Nonsense Spirituality.
Britt, thank you so much and enjoy your day.
Yeah, you too, man. Thanks.
Ciao, ciao. Bye bye.